So, hello, my name is Patty Hubbard, and I'm the Outdoor Recreation Grant Planner at Missouri State Parks. And this is the 2026 Grant Application Workshop for Real Property Acquisition and the Uniform Act for the Land and Water Conservation Fund Grant Application. So during this presentation, I will be referencing the Open Project Selection Process, or OPSP for short, especially in Appendix B, which is the Grant Application Guide. I'll be giving out those page numbers plus the Adobe page numbers, so if you're following along digitally, you can also follow along. This presentation will be covering the following sections of the application only, which is the acquisition of real property, which is question 35 through 52. Make sure that at the end that we have all our questions are about this section only. And before we start this presentation and going over the application, we are going to talk about the process that you have to follow when acquiring real property with federal funds. So all acquisition with real property with federal funds, whether through purchase, donation, easement, or lease, must comply with the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policy Act of 1970, as amended, also known as the Uniform Act. This act also applies to acquiring property with non-federal funds when the intent is to apply for an LWCF grant in the future for development. In other words, a project sponsor can't knowingly circumvent the federal law by acquiring real property with local funds and not follow the regulations of this act, and then apply for LWCF funding in the future for the development. The Uniform Act ensures that landowners are fully informed of their rights and are justly compensated when selling or leasing property or selling or leasing any type of interest in the property. As part of this assurance, the Uniform Act requires an appraisal and appraisal review to be performed that comply with the provisions outlined in the Uniform Appraisal Standards of Federal Land Acquisition. Additionally, the Act covers the provision of relocation assistance to owners and tenants displaced by the acquisition. So even if you're not using the land as match or grant expense, if you are acquiring the property now to use an LWCF grant on later, it must comply with the Uniform Act. Many of the steps of the Uniform Act must actually take place during the application process, and we will be covering those today. It's important to remember that you can't take title of the property, even if it's a donation, until a federal award received and our staff issues a notice to proceed. So here are the steps that you must follow in order to comply with the Uniform Act. Steps 1 through 4 are completed in the application process. If the property is being donated by the landowner, then they can complete also step 7. As I am talking through these steps, I wanted to let you know that I also do have templates for most of the letters and waivers, plus links to booklets that I will be talking about. If you would like a copy of those templates and stuff, you can email me and I'll be happy to send you that packet. Most of the steps of the Uniform Act will occur during the application process because you need to know the value of the land in order to place it in your budget. So step 1 is to conduct a title search. You have to conduct a title search of the property to be acquired to determine ownership of the property, any liens or restrictions on the property, or any rights or interests held by others. It is recommended that a title company conduct the title search. The title search must accompany the application as part of the supporting documentation. The cost of the title search is not eligible cost for either reimbursement or match in the LWCF program and must be borne solely by the project sponsor. A title search is a must. You cannot just do your research with the recorder's office. Number 2, contacting the seller. Make initial contact with the landowner to see if the land might be available for sale or donation. At this point, the price cannot be negotiated since it must be based off an appraisal. If the initial contact is made via a telephone call, follow up with a letter that indicates notice of interest to the property owner. The notice of interest letter must include a statement to the landowner's rights, which is that a landowner has the right of just compensation for the property. Property sponsors are encouraged to enclose a copy of the Federal Highways Administration booklet entitled Acquisition: Acquiring Real Property for Federal and Federal Aid Programs and Projects. If a community approaches the city about donating land, you should follow up with a letter to explain to them that they have the right to just compensation. And I do have a template for a letter of interest in my packet that I can send you. Number 3, determine relocation assistance eligibility. Determine whether or not the owners, any businesses, or any tenants on the property might be eligible for relocation assistance. The landowner and any tenants must be informed of their location rights. It is recommended that both the owner and any tenants be given a copy of the Federal Highways booklet entitled Relocation: Your Rights and Benefits as a Displaced Person under a Federal Relocation Assistance Program. A PDF of this can be downloaded from online, and there are links in the guide to that. A relocation plan will be required for any persons displaced from the acquisition of property. Refer to the Federal Highways Relocation Booklet for additional information. Number 4, conduct an appraisal and appraisal review. Before negotiating a purchase price with the landowner, the real property to be acquired must be appraised. Have the property appraised by a licensed appraiser according to the Uniform Appraisal Standards of Federal Land Acquisition, commonly referred to as a Yellow Book appraisal, with the landowner given the opportunity to accompany the appraiser. The appraisal then must be reviewed by a state certified review appraiser. Our staff does not do appraisal services. The cost of all appraisal, review appraisal, waiver evaluation, and incidental real estate expenses are not eligible costs for either reimbursement or match, and must be borne solely by the project sponsor. Exceptions to the appraisal requirements include the following: a waiver evaluation when the fair market value is less than $10,000. If the acquisition of the property is not complicated and a review of the available data suggests that the fair market value will likely be less than $10,000, an appraisal is not required. Instead, a waiver evaluation from a qualified person knowledgeable of the general market values in the project area will be acceptable. Note that the average of the final value of 2 or more appraisal reports to estimate the fair market value of the appraisal is unacceptable and does not meet the requirements of the Uniform Act. I do recommend that you get someone who is Yellow Book certified in order to do this waiver evaluation for you. The second exception is when property is being donated. An appraisal is not required when the landowner is donating the property and releases the project sponsors from their obligation to appraise the property. However, if the value of the donated property is being used as the project sponsor's match for an LWCF grant, an appraisal or a waiver evaluation will still be needed in order to be conducted to determine the fair market value of the property in order to determine the match amount. If the value of the land is being used as match, then the appraisal and the appraisal view will need to be included with the supporting documentation. Number 5, establish an offer of just compensation. Before initiating negotiations with the property owner, the property sponsor must establish an amount which they believe is just compensation for the real property. The amount cannot be less than the approved appraisal of the fair market value of the property, but and must take into account the value of allowable damages and benefits to any remaining property. The property or the project sponsor will then make a written offer to the owner to acquire the property for the full amount believed to be the just compensation. The written offer must enclose a copy of the appraisal and appraisal review and must either be hand delivered or sent by certified or registered first class mail. Return receipt requested. 6, it's a statement of just compensation. So the offer of just compensation must also include a written statement for the basis of the offer of just compensation. The statement must include the amount offered as just compensation, a description and location identification of the real property and or interest in the real property to be acquired, identification of the buildings, structures, and other improvements which are included as part of the offer, and whether or not there are any other separately held ownerships in the property, such as a tenant-owned improvements. The statement must indicate that these ownership interests are not included in this offer. If the project sponsor is acquiring a portion of the property and not the whole, there may be damages or benefits to the remaining property. The statement of just compensation must also reflect these damages or benefits. 7, real property donation. In the case where the landowner is willing to donate the real property, an offer of just compensation and the statement of just compensation are not required. Instead, the landowner must sign a waiver of right to just compensation, which states that the landowner waives their right to just compensation and agrees to donate the property or property interest. In some cases, a landowner may be willing to sell real property for less than the full market value, but is not able to donate the entire value of the land. The difference between the sale price and the appraised fair market value can be considered donated land value. For an LWCF project, federal reimbursement may be provided for the purchase part of the acquisition, but not for the donated part. However, the donated value can be used as match for the purchase cost of the same tract of property or for the development of the project. Landowners making partial donations must also sign a waiver of right to just compensation. By signing, the landowner is acknowledging a partial donation of the property and waives his or her rights to the compensation for the donated parcel. The appraisal requirements outlined above apply to both full and partial donations and do the requirements for notifying the landowner and any tenants of their rights. And I have in that packet template letters for that waiver of just compensation and the offer of just compensation. So number 8, landowner negotiations. Once the landowner has received the offer of just compensation and statement of just compensation, the owner must be given a reasonable opportunity to consider the offer and present any additional information or material the owner believes is relevant to determining the value of the property. The owner must also be given opportunity to suggest modifications to the proposed terms and conditions of the purchase. 9, updating an offer of just compensation. The project sponsor must have the initial appraisal updated or obtain a new appraisal if the information presented by the landowner indicates the need is warranted, or if a material change in the character or condition of the property is such that it requires updated information, or if a significant delay has occurred since the initial appraisal. The purchase must be made within a year of the initial appraisal being conducted, or a new appraisal is required. If the new appraisal information indicates that a change in the purchase order offer is warranted, the sponsor must provide the landowner with a new offer of just compensation and statement of just compensation reflecting this updated appraisal information. And number 10, provide justification for purchase offer if higher than the appraisal value. The purchase price of the property may exceed the amount offered as just compensation when reasonable efforts to negotiate an agreement at that amount have failed, and the project sponsor considers the higher price as being reasonable, prudent, and in the public interest. A detailed and well-documented statement of this difference with all pertinent appraisal documentation and a history of the negotiations documenting discussions of price between the landowner and the sponsor must be submitted. The statement should also indicate the importance of the proposed purchase as opposed to alternate sites or other justification regarding the need to purchase the subject project property at a higher amount. If our staff and the National Park Service agree the higher negotiated price represents a reasonable cost, the amount can be eligible for assistance if significant funds are available in the fiscal year apportionment and not have already been obligated to other projects. So we're going to go directly to the section of the application, which is question 35 through 52, and it pertains to the applicants who are acquiring real property, whether by donation, purchase, or lease. So please note that this section combined with the following section are valued at 20 points. The reason we combine the sections is because not all projects will include both acquisition and development. So we want to make sure that they were scored fairly. So if you are doing both, each section will be worth 10 points each. If you're doing one section, just development, then that full 20 points goes to that section. If property is being acquired, whether by purchase, donation, or lease, this section must be completed. If you are not acquiring property as part of the project, you can complete question 35 and then skip this section. So question 36 asks, why is acquisition necessary? This is where you will explain the purpose for acquiring property as part of the project, such as creating a new park in the city or adding land to an existing park. Question 37 asks you to describe the existing resources and features of the site that make it desirable for public outdoor recreation. So what existing resources and features made you choose this site? Is this land within walking distance of a neighborhood? Or is it going to be used as the new county park? Question 38 and 40 ask about the parcel or parcels to be acquired. So what is the name? What is the size and acreage? And what is the value of the land? The value of the land must be based off an appraisal and appraisal review that meets the uniform appraisal standards for federal land acquisition and Title 49 CFR Part 24, also commonly known as the Yellow Book Appraisal. The appraisal should be less than 6 months old. If the property is valued at less than $10,000, a waiver evaluation can be completed by the qualified professional and used in lieu of an appraisal. Please include a copy of the appraisal and the appraisal review and or the waiver evaluation with this application. Remember that in order to use an LWC grant on new acquired property, the land acquisition must comply with the Uniform Act. The cost of the appraisal, review appraisal, waiver evaluation, and incidental real estate expenses are not eligible costs for either reimbursement or match in the LWCF program and must be borne solely by the project sponsor. The only thing that we can put in this application is the value of the land. So question 41 asks you to indicate what is your anticipated acquisition date. Since property can't be acquired until an award is received, I recommend that you write something to the effect of 1 to 3 months after award or 1 to 6 months after award, depending on if you know it's going to take a little bit longer. 42 asks you to affirm which statement is true. So 1, a state certified review appraisal has reviewed the appraisal and has determined that it is prepared in conformity with the Uniform Appraisal Standards for federal land acquisition, or a qualified professional has prepared a waiver evaluation for the property in conformity with 49 CFR 24.102 CD2. And then question 43 asks you to indicate who the property is being purchased from, what is the name of the seller or the donor, and include their letter of intent to sell, donate, or lease the property as part of your supporting documentation. Question 44 asks if there are any buildings or structures being purchased along with the property. If there are, please describe what is planned for those structures and whether the grant-funded project includes the value of those structures. Question 65 asks you to explain how the site will be made open and accessible for public outdoor recreation use. So describe your plans, including any land, planned signage, entrances, parking, site improvements, and other allowable activities. If this application includes construction of facilities, include a brief description of the scope of work. 46 asks when the park will be open for public outdoor recreation use. Please provide an anticipated date for when the site will be made open and available for public outdoor recreation use. For example, you could say within 1 to 2 years of the notice of grant award, or you could give a very specific date like January 2029. Question 27 asks you to describe the development that is planned for the site in order to allow the acquisition area to be open for public outdoor recreation use. So all land that is acquired with LWCF funds must be developed within 3 years of acquiring the property. The information will be used to ensure compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. And as such, should focus on what you reasonably expect to accomplish within 3 years, and not what a master plan might cover, which might be 10 or more years to accomplish. 48 is for projects that include only acquisition. If it asks if the development will be delayed by more than 3 years from grant close, explain why this acquisition is still a priority for grant funding at this time, and describe the opportunity the public will have to use the site in the interim. If development will not be delayed for more than 3 years from the grant close, indicate when development will be completed, and if your project includes construction, just write in A. 49, ask if this acquisition is an addition to an existing park or other recreational area. If it is connected to another park or recreation area, how will it support or enhance the existing park? Please explain that. Question 50, ask if the property is being acquired under threat of condemnation, and if it is, please explain. 51 asks if the property is listed for public sale. If it was, explain how the property owner was made aware of the project sponsor's interest in the property. Include the letters with the supporting documentation. So that's your letter of interest. Question 52 asks if the project will involve donated property. If it will, include evidence that the seller was offered the fair market value of the property as just compensation and is willingly or is choosing to donate the property instead. Include those letters of support with the closing documents. And then, of course, we have the final checklist of all the supporting documentations you want to make sure that you have with your packet. And then, of course, you want to make sure that it gets signed by your representative. And just a reminder that the final applications are due to us by November 14th. You need to mail 2 hard copies plus 2 copies of the supporting documentation. Must be postmarked or received by that November 14th date.